Hello and welcome to Civilization at Night. At the foot of Mount Vesuvius, beneath the bright sky of southern Italy, there lies a city of empty streets. Its paving stones still carry the grooves of ancient wheels. Its houses still open onto quiet courtyards. Painted walls, shop counters, ovens, fountains, and election notices remain where people once used them. In some places, even the ordinary marks of daily life have survived. A name scratched into plaster, a doorway worn by passing feet, a room prepared for a day that never truly ended. This is Pompeii. Nearly 2,000 years ago, the city disappeared beneath ash, stone, and darkness. Vesuvius destroyed its buildings, silenced its streets, and ended thousands of lives. Yet the same eruption that erased Pompeii from the living world also preserved it with extraordinary detail. That is the great paradox of this ancient city. A disaster buried Pompeii, but burial protected it. Walls remained standing beneath the volcanic layers. Paintings kept their colour. Shops, baths, kitchens, temples, and private rooms survived long after the people who knew them were gone. Because of that catastrophe, we can walk today through one of the most intimate records of Roman life ever discovered. Tonight we will follow Pompeii through its final transformation. We will begin while the city is still alive, among its bakers, merchants, labourers, wealthy households, crowded streets, and painted rooms. We will look toward the mountain rising quietly above the vineyards, a familiar part of the landscape that few understood as a threat. Then we will move into the hours when daylight faded beneath the eruption. We will follow the changing sky, the falling stone, the difficult choices made by families, and the slow silence that settled over the city. But our journey will not end with destruction. We will explore what the ash preserved, what survivors later returned to recover, and how Pompeii gradually emerged again after centuries beneath the earth. The story is not only about a city that died, it is about the fragile details of ordinary life, and the strange way those details outlasted the world that created them. Before we begin, you can support Civilization at Night by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And wherever you are listening from tonight, you are welcome here. For a little while, the noise of the present can remain outside. Let the day loosen its hold. Let the streets around you grow distant. Tonight, we are walking through Pompeii. The city is still awake. Water runs from the fountains. Bread is baking behind open doors. Voices drift across the forum, and the afternoon light rests warmly on the stone. In the hours ahead, doors will close, roofs will tremble, and familiar paths will vanish beneath a growing weight of ash. Some residents will flee toward open country or the sea. Others will wait, gather possessions, or seek protection within the homes they know. Their choices will be made without maps, warnings, or any clear understanding of the force awakening above them. For now, however, the markets remain busy, the baths remain warm, and evening has not yet fully arrived. Above the rooftops, Vesuvius appears calm. No one yet knows what the mountain is about to do. Pompeii was not a capital, and it was never meant to rival Rome. It was a prosperous provincial town, compact enough to cross on foot, yet busy enough to contain nearly every rhythm of Roman urban life. Merchants, craftsmen, labourers, freedmen, enslaved people, landowners, travellers, and officials all moved through the same narrow streets, passing beneath painted signs and beside walls crowded with messages. We enter through one of the city gates and follow the road inward. The paving stones are dark and uneven, polished by generations of wheels and sandals. Deep grooves run along the surface, where carts repeatedly followed the same route. At intervals, Raised stepping stones allow pedestrians to cross without walking through mud or wastewater. The gaps between them are wide enough for cartwheels to pass. Water gives the city much of its movement. Lead pipes carry it from an aqueduct into towers, public fountains, baths, and the homes of the wealthy. At street corners, stone basins offer water to anyone who approaches. The rims are worn smooth where countless hands rested while jars were filled. Even in a crowded town, the steady sound of water brings a sense of order. Further along, the smell of bread begins to drift into the street. Pompeii has many bakeries. Inside one, heavy millstones stand around a central room, shaped like broad hourglasses of volcanic rock. Grain is poured into the upper section and ground as the stones turn. Nearby, dough is prepared and placed inside a large brick oven. Some bakeries are attached to shops, allowing fresh loaves to pass directly from the heat of the oven to the people waiting outside. Not every household has a large kitchen. Many residents buy prepared food from street counters, now often called thermopolia. Their masonry surfaces contain deep jars that once held food or drink. Customers pause there briefly, eat, exchange news, and continue on their way. These places are practical, social, and woven into the ordinary pace of the city. The streets grow busier as we approach the Forum. This broad open space is the public heart of Pompeii. Temples, administrative buildings, markets, and meeting places surround it. Here, business is conducted, judgments are heard, goods are discussed, and political support is displayed. Painted notices on nearby walls recommend candidates for office. Some appear formal, others are written with humour, exaggeration, or the enthusiasm of local tradesmen. Pompeii speaks through its walls. Names, jokes, insults, declarations of love, advertisements, and brief personal messages cover plaster across the city. Some are carefully painted, others are scratched quickly by someone with a sharp tool and a passing thought. These marks make the city feel close. They remind us that its residents were not silent figures in marble. They complained, boasted, flirted, argued, and tried to be remembered. Beyond the Forum, we enter a quieter street and step through the doorway of a private house. The entrance passage leads toward an atrium open to the sky. Rainwater falls through the opening into a shallow basin set into the floor. Around it are small rooms used for sleeping, storage, work, or receiving visitors. Deeper inside, a garden may be framed by columns, with painted walls extending the space into imagined landscapes. In wealthy homes, frescoes show gardens, architecture, myths, animals, and distant scenes. Red, black, yellow, and blue surfaces transform plain walls into theatrical spaces. Mosaics cover some floors with geometric patterns or carefully arranged images. Yet even grand houses are not isolated from work. Shops may open directly onto the street, and household labour continues behind decorated rooms. Public baths offer another kind of interior world. They are places to wash, exercise, rest, conduct business, and meet acquaintances. Visitors move through changing rooms into warm and hot chambers heated from below. Steam softens the air. Conversation echoes from stone surfaces. Outside, the noise of carts and vendors continues, but within the baths, the rhythm is slower. Pompeii is alive with routine, but it is not untouched by disaster. 17 years earlier, in a D62, a powerful earthquake damaged temples, houses, streets, and public buildings. Repairs are still underway. Fresh plaster covers older decoration. Masonry remains unfinished. Some properties have changed use, and scaffolding or building materials interrupt familiar spaces. The city is recovering. Its people have learned to live with tremors, cracked walls, and the patient work of rebuilding. Nothing in the afternoon traffic suggests that this ordinary world is nearing its end. Bakers tend their ovens, water continues to flow, and unfinished walls wait for another morning of repair beneath the familiar sky above them. Above all of this, beyond the roofs, courtyards, fountains, and columns, rises the mountain. Its slopes are green with farms and vineyards. From the streets below, Vesuvius appears to be part of the ordinary landscape. Vesuvius did not appear to the people of Pompeii as an enemy. Its lower slopes were green and productive, covered with vineyards, orchards, farms, and villas. The soil around the mountain was rich, dark, and generous. Grapes grew well there, and wine from the region travelled through local markets and beyond the Bay of Naples. Figs, olives, grain, and vegetables also benefited from the fertile ground. To live beneath Vesuvius was to live close to abundance. The mountain shaped the landscape, but it did not dominate daily thought. From the streets of Pompeii, it rose beyond the roofs as a familiar presence, softened by distance and vegetation. It belonged to the horizon, like the sea, the walls, and the road leading toward nearby towns. The Romans did not understand volcanoes as we do today. They had no instruments to measure pressure beneath the earth, no maps of danger zones, and no organized system for warning an entire population. Vesuvius had not produced a major eruption within living memory. Its ancient violence had faded from human experience, leaving behind only fertile land and an apparently quiet summit. Earthquakes were another matter. The people of Pompeii knew the movement of the ground. The great earthquake of AD 62 had damaged much of the city, and smaller tremors continued in the years that followed. Walls cracked, roof tiles shifted, objects rattled on shelves. Yet repeated disturbance can become familiar. What once causes fear may, over time, become part of ordinary life. Repairs continued. Businesses reopened. Homes were redecorated. The city adapted. In the days before the eruption, there may have been further signs. Wells behaving strangely, animals becoming unsettled, or tremors increasing beneath the town. Ancient accounts, however, do not allow us to reconstruct every warning with certainty. For many residents, nothing they experienced clearly announced that the mountain was approaching catastrophe. Even the exact date remains debated. For generations, the eruption was traditionally placed on the 24th of August, based on surviving copies of letters written by Pliny the Younger. But evidence discovered at Pompeii, including autumn fruits, heavier clothing, and a charcoal inscription likely written in October, has led many scholars to favour a date later in the year. Whatever the precise day, the season was changing. The vineyards had recently been harvested. Storage jars stood ready. Repairs continued in the streets. Smoke rose from ovens, and the city followed its familiar routines beneath a clear southern sky. Then, sometime around midday, the mountain changed. People stopped in streets and courtyards, turning their faces toward the widening cloud overhead. A column of ash and gas began to rise above Vesuvius. At first, it may have seemed distant, strange, and almost beautiful. At first, the people of Pompeii may not have understood what they were seeing. Above Vesuvius, the rising column widened as it climbed, dark at its centre and pale at the edges where sunlight caught the ash. Pliny the Younger, watching from across the Bay of Naples, later compared its shape to a pine tree, a tall trunk lifting into the sky before spreading into branches. For those beneath it, however, the sight was not simply strange. It was changing. The cloud grew higher and heavier. A deep sound rolled across the landscape. The ground trembled. Birds lifted suddenly from rooftops and fields, and people stepped into streets, gardens, and doorways to look toward the mountain. Then the first fragments began to fall. At the beginning, they may have seemed almost light, flecks of ash drifting through the air, settling on roof tiles, courtyards, and clothing. But the fall quickly thickened. Small pieces of pale pumice struck the streets and bounced across the stones. They gathered in corners, filled gutters, and covered the familiar colours of the city beneath a dull, powdery layer. People began to make choices. Some left immediately, moving toward the city gates and the roads beyond Pompeii. They carried children, money, jewellery, food, documents, or whatever could be gathered quickly. Others hesitated. A home represented security, property, memory, and everything a family owned. To abandon it without knowing whether the danger would pass was not an easy decision. Many may have believed the disturbance would end, as previous earthquakes had ended. Some remained inside, closing shutters and placing cloth over their mouths. Others took shelter beneath stronger roofs or in underground rooms. Enslaved people may have waited for instructions. Shopkeepers may have tried to protect their goods. Families may have searched for relatives across streets that were becoming more difficult to cross. The eruption continued. Pumice fell for hour after hour. The pieces were light enough to float on water, but together they became dangerously heavy. They accumulated on roofs in deepening layers. Wooden beams bent under the pressure. Tiles shifted. Walls already weakened by years of earthquakes began to crack. Everywhere, the sounds of the city changed. The usual movement of carts and conversation gave way to the constant striking of stone against stone. Roof tiles rattled beneath the falling pumice. Doors slammed. Animals cried out. People called to one another through air that was becoming thick with dust. The sky darkened. At first, the cloud may have dimmed the sunlight like an approaching storm. Then the afternoon light weakened further, until lamps and torches were needed inside buildings. Ash filled the air and reduced the distance people could see. Streets that had been familiar for a lifetime became uncertain passages between shadowed walls. Day was slowly becoming night. The darkness was not complete everywhere at once. It moved and deepened as the column above Vesuvius spread across the sky and the wind carried ash over the city. At moments, lightning may have flashed within the volcanic cloud, briefly revealing roofs, columns, and frightened faces before darkness closed again. Those trying to escape had to push through loose pumice that rose around their ankles and then their legs. Each step became slower. The stones slid beneath the feet. Falling materials struck heads and shoulders. Some people tied cushions or pieces of cloth over themselves for protection. The city gates, once ordinary points of arrival and departure, became thresholds between danger and uncertainty. Beyond Pompeii, the roads were crowded with people moving away from the mountain. Some headed toward the countryside. Others may have turned toward the coast, hoping to find boats or clearer air. Yet the wider landscape offered no certain refuge. Ash was falling across the region, earthquakes continued, and the cloud above the bay seemed to expand without end. Inside Pompeii, the weight on the roofs increased. One house after another began to fail. A beam gave way. Tiles collapsed inward. Walls crumbled into rooms where people had taken shelter. The danger was no longer only above the mountain. It had entered the city itself, pressing down on every roof and filling every open space. Still, many residents had time to leave. The eruption did not destroy Pompeii in a single instant. For many hours, people could see the danger growing and decide whether to remain or flee. A large part of the population probably escaped during this long first phase, carrying with them whatever they were able to save. But not everyone left. Some were too old, too young, too ill, or too frightened to travel. Some may have been responsible for property, relatives, animals, or employers who refused to go. Others waited too long, believing that the worst had already passed. By evening, Pompeii was no longer the city we entered earlier. The Forum was buried beneath falling pumice. Fountains disappeared under ash. Shop counters were abandoned. Bread remained inside ovens. Lamps burned in sealed rooms, while the darkness outside deepened. The mountain continued to empty itself into the sky, and through the long night, the layer covering Pompeii grew higher. The nights over Pompeii did not bring relief. The eruption continued with a force no one inside the city could understand. Pumice still fell through the darkness, striking roofs, courtyards, and streets already buried beneath deep, unstable layers. The weight above every room increased, and the ground kept trembling beneath the foundations. Inside the houses, people waited. Some gathered in atriums or corridors where they believed the walls were strongest. Others moved into cellars, storage rooms, or spaces beneath stairways. Lamps cast small circles of light through air thick with dust. Cloth was held over mouths and noses. Every sound from outside, the crash of a roof, the splitting of timber, the movement of stone, carried the possibility that the next collapse would come closer. Hours passed without any sign that the eruption was ending. The darkness became complete. Ash and gas blocked the sky, and even the pale light of the moon could not reach the streets. Those who looked toward Vesuvius would have seen nothing of the mountain itself, only a black horizon interrupted at moments by flashes inside the volcanic cloud. Then the eruption changed. The towering column above Vesuvius began to collapse under its own weight. Instead of rising, immense clouds of hot gas, ash and shattered rock rushed outward along the ground. These surges moved with terrifying speed, crossing the landscape and pouring toward the towns below. Herculaneum, closer to the western side of the mountain, had already been overwhelmed. Pompeii remained farther away, but not beyond reach. The first surges may not have entered deeply into the city. Later ones did. They swept over walls and through open spaces, carrying heat, darkness, and choking ash into streets, where people were still trying to move or shelter. For those who remained, there was almost no time to react. Some were caught in rooms where roofs had already weakened. Others were in streets near gates or in gardens. A few had carried keys, coins, jewelry, tools, or small objects they believed might help them begin again. Many were found close together, suggesting families or companions had stayed near one another through the final hours. Their last moments should not be reduced to spectacle. They were residents of a living city. Parents, children, workers, merchants, enslaved people, visitors, and neighbours. Each had faced the same impossible uncertainty. To remain might preserve a home. To leave might lead into greater danger. No one possessed the knowledge needed to choose with confidence. The final surges moved through Pompeii with enough heat and force to extinguish life almost immediately in many places. Elsewhere, falling roofs, inhaled ash, and the long accumulation of pumice had already taken their toll. The catastrophe did not produce one single kind of death, just as it had not produced one single response. It reached different streets and households in different ways, leaving behind a scattered record of flight, hesitation, shelter, and loss that archaeologists would one day try to understand from bodies, buildings, and the objects held in human hands alone. By morning, the decision no longer mattered. The streets had vanished beneath meters of volcanic material. Upper walls and rooftops were broken or buried. Doorways opened into darkness. The forum, once filled with voices and movement, was hidden beneath a new and lifeless surface. Water no longer ran from the fountains. No carts moved along the rutted roads. No bread was carried from the ovens. No political notices were read. No bargains made. No conversations continued at the baths or food counters. The city had fallen silent. Ash still drifted through the air after the violence had passed, settling into rooms, gardens, and empty spaces. It covered objects where they had been left and filled the outlines of things that would later decay and disappear. Above the buried streets, the landscape looked altered beyond recognition. Pompeii had not been erased completely, it had been sealed away. The ash that buried Pompeii did more than cover the city. It entered rooms, settled over furniture, filled courtyards, pressed against doors, and wrapped itself around the ordinary objects of daily life. In many places, destruction became a strange form of protection. Walls that would normally have collapsed under centuries of weather remained supported by volcanic material. Paintings were hidden from sunlight. Floors, ovens, counters, and drains disappeared beneath layers that no one would disturb for generations. What survived was not only architecture. The streets still preserve the deep grooves cut by cartwheels. Raised stepping stones remain where pedestrians once crossed above mud and wastewater. Public fountains stand at corners, their rims worn smooth by hands that lifted jars again and again. In bakeries, millstones and ovens reveal the work required to feed a Roman town. In shops, masonry counters preserve the openings of storage jars, once used for food, wine, or other goods. Inside private houses, the evidence becomes more intimate. Painted rooms still show gardens, columns, animals, myths, and imagined landscapes. Some walls carry bright reds and deep blacks. Others are decorated with delicate borders, theatrical scenes, or images chosen to display wealth and education. Mosaic floors survive beneath the dust, their small stones arranged into patterns that once welcomed guests into halls and dining rooms. Yet Pompeii is most powerful when it moves away from grandeur. A cup left in a room, a lamp placed beside a wall, a cooking pot blackened by fire, or a small tool abandoned near a workshop can speak more quietly than a temple. These objects do not describe emperors or military victories. Even the smallest detail can restore movement, intention, and personality to an otherwise empty room. They reveal habits. They show how people prepared food, stored water, repaired clothing, decorated homes, and organized the spaces in which they slept and worked. The walls preserve voices as well. Election notices name candidates and praise their character. Advertisements announce services and events. Graffiti records jokes, insults, greetings, love, jealousy, pride, boredom, and simple statements of presence. Some writers wanted to persuade, others wanted only to leave a mark before moving on. Together, these messages bring Pompeii closer to us. They remind us that the ancient city was not filled with silent statues. Its residents laughed, complained, argued, admired one another, and worried about money, work, reputation, and affection. The language may be old, but the impulses behind it remain familiar. Volcanic material also preserved evidence of things that did not survive. Wood, fabric, food, roots, and human bodies decayed over time, leaving empty spaces inside hardened ash. In the 19th century, excavators learned that these hollows could be filled with plaster. When the surrounding material was removed, the shape of what had once occupied the space appeared again. This method produced the famous casts associated with Pompeii. They preserve posture, clothing, sandals, folds of fabric, and at times the outline of a face or hand. The casts are not statues created by artists. They are records formed by the interaction of ash, decay, and careful excavation. They should be approached not as curiosities, but as the final traces of individual people. The eruption did not freeze every part of Pompeii perfectly. Many roofs collapsed. Valuable objects were carried away by survivors or later searchers. Tunnels disturbed some buildings. Paint faded when exposed, and early excavations sometimes damaged what they uncovered. Pompeii changed before, during, and after the disaster. Even so, the city preserves something extraordinarily rare. Most ancient places reach us through monuments, official inscriptions, and structures rebuilt over many generations. Pompeii gives us kitchens, workshops, rented rooms, taverns, gardens, drains, advertisements, and unfinished repairs. It shows a city not at the moment of ceremonial perfection, but in the middle of ordinary life. That is what the ash preserved. Not a flawless Roman world, and not a city untouched by time, but a dense collection of human traces. A road worn by wheels, a wall covered with messages, a loaf placed near an oven, a room waiting to be entered again. Beneath the silence, daily life remained visible, and centuries later, when the earth was opened, Pompeii would begin to speak. Pompeii did not disappear from human memory in a single day. When the eruption ended and the air began to clear, survivors and nearby communities would have understood that something immense had happened. The landscape was buried, roads were blocked, and familiar landmarks had vanished beneath ash and stone. Yet the people who had escaped still knew where homes, shops, temples, and storehouses had once stood. Some returned. At first, their purpose was survival, not archaeology. They came back to search for relatives, recover valuables, or reclaim anything that might help them begin again. Money, jewelry, tools, building materials, and household goods could still hold enormous value. In places where upper walls remained visible, people dug down through the deposits or entered rooms from above. Their work left traces. Archaeologists have found tunnels cut through hardened volcanic layers and openings broken into walls. Some were probably made by survivors soon after the eruption. Others were dug later by people searching for marble, metal, statues, or reusable stone. Pompeii became, in part, a buried quarry. This explains why many rooms were not found exactly as they had been left during the disaster. Objects had been removed, walls were opened, floors were disturbed. Valuable materials disappeared long before modern excavation began. The Roman authorities also responded to the destruction. Ancient accounts suggest that officials were appointed to manage property and assist communities affected around the Bay of Naples. But rebuilding Pompeii as a functioning city was no longer practical. The depth of the deposits, the destruction of water systems and roads, and the loss of much of the population made recovery almost impossible. Life continued above the ruins. Over time, new soil formed across parts of the buried landscape. Fields, vineyards, and paths returned. People farmed the surface without always knowing exactly what lay beneath. In some areas, higher structures or fragments of walls remained visible, reminders of a city that had not completely vanished. The name Pompeii was not entirely forgotten, but its precise location and shape faded from common understanding. Memory became uncertain. Stories survived, while streets and houses remained sealed below. Centuries passed. Rain softened the landscape. Plants covered disturbed ground. Farmers worked above rooms, once filled with painted walls and household objects. Travellers crossed a countryside that concealed an entire Roman town beneath their feet. Pompeii was therefore never a perfect, untouched time capsule. It was entered, searched, stripped, cultivated, remembered, and gradually misunderstood. Yet enough remained. Enough walls stood beneath the earth. Enough objects stayed in place. Enough writing survived on plaster. The city had been disturbed, but not erased. And when people began to dig again, with greater curiosity, the buried streets were ready to return. The return of Pompeii began slowly, and at first, almost by accident. In the late 16th century, workers digging an underground channel across the area cut through ancient walls and painted rooms. Inscriptions and fragments appeared, but the buried city was not yet understood. The earth closed again over much of what had been exposed. More than a century later, interest returned. In 1738, excavations began at nearby Herculaneum, where tunnels revealed marble, statues, and richly decorated interiors. The discoveries attracted the attention of the Bourbon court at Naples. 10 years later, in 1748, digging began at the site that would eventually be recognized as Pompeii. The first excavators were not archaeologists in the modern sense. Their aim was often to find beautiful objects for royal collections. Tunnels were driven through buildings, paintings were cut from walls, statues, mosaics, and decorative objects were removed, while less impressive rooms were sometimes covered again or left without careful record. Even so, the city slowly emerged. Streets appeared beneath the soil. Houses opened one after another. Temples, shops, baths, and public buildings revealed the scale of the ancient town. Inscriptions helped identify the site, and the name Pompeii returned with certainty. During the 19th century, excavation became more systematic. One of the most important figures was Giuseppe Fiorelli, who directed work at Pompeii from the 1860s. He divided the city into regions and blocks, creating a system still used to locate buildings today. He also encouraged excavators to preserve houses in their original context, rather than remove only their most valuable decorations. Fiorelli is best remembered for a method that transformed empty spaces into human evidence. When excavators encountered hollows inside the hardened ash, they realized that these spaces had once contained bodies, wood, roots, or other materials that had decayed. By pouring liquid plaster into the cavities and allowing it to harden, they could recover the shape left behind. The resulting casts revealed sandals, clothing, gestures, and the final positions of people who had died during the eruption. The method was later used for doors, furniture, plants, and other vanished objects. Pompeii now offered something no collection of statues could provide. It preserved relationships between objects and spaces. A lamp beside a bed, a counter facing a street, an oven beside millstones, or graffiti beside a doorway could be studied together. Archaeologists began to understand not only what Romans owned, but how they moved, worked, ate, worshipped, and lived. Excavation also created new dangers. Once uncovered, walls were exposed to rain, sunlight, vegetation, pollution, and the pressure of visitors. Paintings that had survived beneath ash could fade. Buildings required constant repair. Every discovery carried a new responsibility to protect what had been revealed. The city did not simply return from the earth. It returned gradually, room by room, street by street, as generations learned how to listen more carefully to what remained. Pompeii had been silent for centuries. Now, its ordinary lives were becoming visible again to the modern world once more. Vesuvius destroyed Pompeii, but it did not erase the lives within it. Beneath the ash, the city kept the marks of people who expected another morning. Wheels had worn grooves into the streets. Bread had been prepared for ovens. Messages remained on walls. Lamps, cups, tools, and painted rooms waited in silence while centuries passed above them. When Pompeii returned, it changed the way the ancient world could be understood. History was no longer only the story of emperors, armies, temples, and laws. It was also the story of shopkeepers opening doors, workers carrying water, families eating together, candidates asking for votes, and strangers scratching thoughts into plaster. The eruption preserved these details through destruction. That is the paradox of Pompeii. The mountain ended the life of the city, yet the layers it created protected enough of that life for distant generations to recognize it. Today, evening still settles across the streets. The last visitors leave, shadows lengthen beneath doorways, the colors on the walls grow softer, and the stones release the warmth of the day. Beyond the roofs, Vesuvius remains on the horizon, quiet beneath the fading sky. Pompeii is silent once more, but it is no longer forgotten. Its people remain present in the roads they crossed, the rooms they decorated, the words they left behind, and the ordinary objects their hands once touched. Thank you for walking through the city with me tonight. Wherever you are, I hope the story has carried you gently away from the present. Rest well and have a calm and peaceful night.